France has wielded considerable influence over its ex-colonies in Africa for an extended period. However, current events indicate that Africans are actively advocating for the termination of relationships with France. Current French actions in Africa consistently elicit a negative response from populations habitually inclined to distrust French motives. What exactly is causing this growing unpopularity between France and Africa, and why is it happening now? To understand, let's look into the origins of France's influence in Africa and assess the extensive reach it has had. This influence traces back to France's history of colonialism in Africa, with the invasion of Algiers in 1830 marking the onset of French colonization on the continent. French rule starkly contradicted its professed commitment to civilizing indigenous populations, instead entailing violent conquest, economic exploitation, legal inequality, and socio-cultural disruption. France imposed a centralized administration, enforcing its laws, language, and education system on diverse African societies, resulting in the marginalization of traditional leadership and cultural practices. Similar to recent times, Africans persistently opposed French rule throughout the colonial era, engaging in uprisings, boycotts, and the establishment of national movements, crucially shaping the path towards independence. In the 1960s, France eventually granted independence peacefully to most of its West and Central African colonies. However, this nominal independence did not translate into true sovereignty for Africa. Since the process of decolonization occurred only mildly, there was no clear demarcation from colonial rule to statehood, resulting in the persistence of various exploitative French systems. Over the years, France repeatedly declared the end of this exploitative relationship, but its persistence remained evident to Africans. In a 1990 speech at Laval, former French President François Mitterrand pledged to prioritize democratic partners in Africa. However, inconsistencies in France's alliances, like supporting authoritarian regimes in Central Africa, fueled mockery and increased public disillusionment with Paris's human rights rhetoric. After World War II, France aimed to rebuild its economy and keep control over its former colonies. In 1945, French President Charles de Gaulle established the French colonies in the African Monetary Zone, now called the Communauté Financière Africaine, introducing the CFA franc currency. As a result, France sustained continuous political influence in West and Central Africa. This influence often involved the installation of leaders with pro-French leanings and the negotiation of favorable trade agreements. Regrettably, this often evolved into a mutual protection of vested interests, which sidelined human rights and transparency. The CFA was also instrumental in sustaining France's economic influence in Africa. 12 of France's former colonies were members of the CFA, comprising 14% of Africa's overall population and contributing to 12% of the continent's GDP. Under the CFA arrangement, these colonies were obligated to hold 50% of their foreign currency reserves in the French treasury, with an additional 20% reserved for financial liabilities. This meant member states reserved only 30% of reserves within their borders. The long-term impact included reduced per capita growth and slowed progress in poverty reduction in these colonies. Without addressing sovereignty concerns, the system couldn't operate efficiently, limiting industrialization, economic development, and trade among member states. Concerns about the monetary zone and France's influence in it have long existed, but tensions have escalated in the past decade. Progressive West African commentators and urban youth now call for the abolition of the CFA franc. In 2017, the non-governmental organization SOS Pan-Africa led numerous protests against the CFA franc in cities across Africa and Europe. Pan-Africanists, economists, and activists united to advocate for the CFA zone countries to break away. During the same year, a video of popular activist Kemi Sever burning a 5,000 CFA franc banknote sparked significant media controversy and revived a debate on the common currency and the enduring influence France exerts over Francophone Africa. Back in 2010, Senegalese President Abdoulaye Wade asserted, after 50 years of independence, if we take back our monetary power, we will manage better. Despite the CFA franc still maintaining its status as the official currency in 14 African countries today, its future is uncertain. Substantial changes in the years ahead are expected, with the potential emergence of new currencies in both West and Central Africa, signifying a hopeful liberation from France's monetary influence. However, France's influence extends beyond monetary matters and has been problematic in its relationship with Africa. Acknowledging this, current French President Emmanuel Macron aimed to rejuvenate his country's diplomatic ties with various African nations. Some aspects of this shift were intended to more directly address the legacy of French colonialism in Francophone countries. However, efforts to deepen economic and security connections in more equitable ways have fallen short of high expectations, encountering difficulties in discarding entrenched past practices. In fact, President Macron has encountered diplomatic missteps that have further strained France's standing in Africa. In November 2019, following the death of 13 French troops in a helicopter crash in Mali, he insisted that West African leaders urgently travel to France for an emergency summit, an outburst perceived as neo-colonial arrogance, especially given Mali and Niger's heavier recent military losses. President Macron had to swiftly change course, flying to Niamey, Niger's capital, to pay respects to the Nigerian military dead and postponing the summit until January 2020. Despite President Macron's expressed willingness to improve the strained relations between France and Africa, numerous underlying problems cannot be easily dismissed by the African population. France's military involvement in Africa has only proven to be counterproductive despite its stated intentions. Historically, France has entered into defense agreements that involve frequent military interventions in support of unpopular pro-French African leaders. However, rather than fostering stability, these interventions have often bolstered corrupt and abusive figures, such as Chad's former president Idriss Déby and former Burkinabe president Blaise Compaoré. This has posed additional challenges to the struggle for democracy, as the relationship between French political leaders and their African allies have often been marked by corruption and creating a powerful elite at the expense of African citizens. Also, France's dependence on military intervention in regions in Africa such as Burkina Faso, the Central African Republic, Chad, and Mali has eclipsed the exploration of alternative foreign policy tools. This security-centric approach disregards crucial political and social dynamics in Africa, often failing to address the root issues. Similarly, the persistence of the Sahel situation underscores the inadequacy of France's military involvement. Deploying over 5,000 French troops in the region has not decisively addressed jihadist threats, leading to ongoing attacks on local communities and security forces. Since the French-led response to Sahel insurgencies has not helped West African governments regain control, there's a growing local sentiment that France, as a high-tech Western military power, should either solve the problem or step aside. France's persistent focus on security, coupled with nationalistic rhetoric and the influence of special forces, indirectly contributed to recent coups in Mali and Chad, perpetuating instability instead of fostering lasting solutions. Since 1990, a notable 78% of 27 coups in sub-Saharan Africa have occurred in Francophone states, many stemming from the legacy of French colonialism. Political resolutions remain elusive due to the military-orientated approach, which overlooks local governance structures, concentrates power, and marginalizes intermediaries. This decline in the ability of France to maintain order in Africa has exposed them to growing criticism. In November 2021, a convoy of French troops on its way to assist in the battle against Islamist militants encountered frequent blockades by protesters while passing through Burkina Faso and Niger. Additionally, in September 2023, demonstrators stationed outside a military base in Niamey, where French troops were housed, occupied the area for weeks. Their actions disrupted supply routes to the personnel and called for an end to France's military presence in West Africa. Also, France's support for West Africa regional body ECOWAS, pressuring coup leaders in Mali and Niger to swiftly return to civilian constitutional rule, faces skepticism from a growing number of young people in Africa, slow to criticize rulers manipulating democratic rules and unwilling to acknowledge popular support for military leaders promising reform. This dissatisfaction led to thousands of Niger coup supporters rallying near a French military base in Niger in August 2023. Expressing their grievances against France and ECOWAS. As France experiences a decline in popularity in Africa and encounters heightened diplomatic competition, other influential nations like China, India, Israel, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates have become new development partners for African countries. Could this trend lead to a complete eradication of all French influence in Africa in the near future? Subscribe to our channel and embark on a journey into Africa's concealed narratives and untold stories. Delve into the continent's abundant history, unravel geopolitical complexities, and navigate its dynamic economy. It's not just about staying informed, it's a venture to challenge misconceptions and celebrate Africa. Join a community dedicated to understanding, engaging, and appreciating appreciating Africa. Hit subscribe, embrace the unknown, and become a part of reshaping perspectives.